Hello, and welcome to our weekly live dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. It's June 14th, 2023. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I'll be your host. If you have a question or a comment for Helga, you can send the questions in at questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them on the chat room, and Anastasia will pass them on to me. Now, in case you missed it, we had an intense dialogue last Saturday on the topic, "The World Needs JFK's Vision of Peace." The full dialogue is posted on the schillerinstitute.com website. It was in commemoration of the 60th anniversary of the historic speech given by John F. Kennedy, in which he made a public affirmation of his commitment to pursue a peaceful relationship with the Soviet Union. And this was just 8 months after the world nearly experienced a nuclear war over the Cuban Missile Crisis. There were many insightful presentations, a lot of interesting discussion, and I think it would be well worthwhile for people to watch that if you haven't, and make sure you spread it around, because these are the kinds of discussions that should be going on among world leaders today. Now, Helga, we can start with some of the early questions that came in, most of which are related to that dialogue, concerns about how to organize to address the crises facing mankind today. Let me start with one from someone from Ohio who sent the question, listening to JFK's June 10th speech brings out strong emotions in older Americans like me. But young people have no connection or little connection to the Kennedy presidency. What advice can you give us about how to make it meaningful to people under 50?
Well, I think that, the more people who are a witness of that period of the Kennedy time, for whom it does mean a lot, get active and, just spread it to every young person you know. I think that would help a great deal. And, I think if we would get some courageous youth who have actually taken the intellectual, adventure, so to speak, to look at this, I think it could really become viral, because, what Kennedy said and what is expressed in this American University speech and many other speeches he gave, it's almost like from a different universe, or at least a different star, a different planet. It's so different than anything what you can hear from the politicians today, because he had a clear idea of a vision for peace, not only just for America, but peace for the world, peace for all times. And I think, right now where the world is on the verge of World War III, and there are many people extremely aware of it, and more people get organized for it. And this is one of the reasons why, many people think of internationalizing the peace movement, which, we have done with the International Peace Coalition. But, if you look at it, we have now the largest air maneuver in the history of NATO. This is extremely dangerous. I mean, we are sitting on a complete powder keg where 250 fighter jets, just imagine an armada of 250 fighter jets, are every day now, flying over Germany, flying up to the Russian border, via up all the way to Estonia or to Romania. And that is, some of them potentially are nuclear capable fighter jets. Now just put yourself in the position of the Russian reconnaissance, who are already watching a hot war in Ukraine, where, in the recent period, many incursions have happened into the Russian territory. So they have to be on the top super alert because of that. And then you have these maneuvers which assume the attack of a country with a strong air force, air power, has already occurred. Now that, puts the whole situation on an extremely super tense level. And one little mistake by a pilot or some misreading, of what the intention is of a certain action, and you could have an uncontrollable escalation. I find it completely irresponsible to hold this maneuver, which apparently was planned since 2018, but is now taking place in the context of a hot war in the middle of Europe. And to have such a maneuver, which is already provocative because of the basis, the scenario on which it's based. So I think, many people are concerned with that. And, the speech by Kennedy and what he actually represents, he had a vision which, is now actually potentially becoming true, because the war danger is one thing, but on the other side, you have a historic process going on which the Western media are absolutely not reporting, and if they're reporting it, they are reporting it as a threat or as a slander. But the vast majority of the world, the global South countries, 151 nations, are forming a new world economic order. And everything you're reading in the media or hearing in the media about Russia being isolated, it's ridiculous. Today was the opening of the St. Petersburg Annual Economic Forum, where more than 100 countries had delegates: Latin America, Southeast Asia, Africa. Practically every part of the world had large delegations and high-ranking people. So then you just had a very important, the 10th meeting between the Arabs and China, and they concluded deals for, I think, over $10 billion. And, there is a completely new orientation. The energy minister of Saudi Arabia was asked how he responds to demands coming from the Western countries not to have dealings with Russia and China. And he said, well, I just ignore it. So, we are in the most incredible transformation of history. Most people are not aware of it, but that doesn't mean, most people in the West are not aware of it, but that doesn't mean it's not taking place. So Kennedy, in a certain sense, bridges that, because, in his speech 60 years ago, he had a vision of the kind of world which is now emerging. So for people in the United States, or for Europe for that matter, because Kennedy was very liked, in Germany, for example, people were completely enthusiastic about Kennedy. It bridges a paradigm which went under with the assassination of Kennedy and the cover-up of his murder by the Warren Commission, and the 60 years, or almost 60 years, which happened since, and it bridges the world which is now emerging. So I can only say, if you are of the age that you do have that it registers with you what the difference was, go out and organize, join the Schiller Institute, join the International Peace Coalition, and tell people about it. Because our campaign to focus on the Kennedy paradigm is not over, because, we have a campaign going where we appealing to the president or the next president of the United States to return to the era of Kennedy, because that is the kind of America the world urgently needs and wants.
Now, here's a question from a German citizen who's now living in the United States. They sent me a copy of a Politico article of Schultz talking about how he's more committed than ever to winning the fight in Ukraine. And this person asks, how long will the German people tolerate an escalation of funding and support for this war in Ukraine while the national economy is going down?
Well, that is the 64 million euro question, because what is happening in Germany right now is equally unbelievable. This country is being destroyed. You have practically 16% of all German firms already are in the process of leaving because the energy prices have become too expensive. 30% are considering to leave, that means almost half of the German industry is about to leave. That means Germany is being deindustrialized in front of our eyes. Why? Well, Nord Stream 2, who sabotaged it? The likelihood that Seymour Hersh is on the mark is I would say, going to be 99.9%, periodic 9%. Those of you who know math know what that means. That assumption by Biden, by Hersh, that it was Biden ordered, is very likely to be true. That means, our ally who is drawing us into this war, which is a proxy war between NATO and Russia, but who controls NATO? That's the United States and to a certain extent the British input. So we are in an untenable situation, and since you have moved outside of Germany, I can only encourage you, if you still have relatives, friends, colleagues in Germany, help us to mobilize that, because what is happening right now is just unbelievable. The new defense minister, Pistorius, said, it doesn't matter if the Russians are now smashing all these Leopard tanks. We just send new ones. We may send up to 100. Now, apparently, the Russians are quite successful in knocking out these tanks. But, this is, it's disgusting. And I don't know, the German population, is being victimized, but they're also a little bit stupid, I have to say.
Well, here's a question from a contact in Algeria who asks, is there anyone in the Biden administration who recognizes the shift that you're talking about in the world and see it as a potential for the United States?
Well, if such a person exists, he or she has been very successful in hiding her identity, because I haven't seen it yet. What I do see is that practically the entire Western establishment, with a few exceptions, like that the government of Hungary, a couple of other, people who, but in general, the establishment of the Western countries are behaving absolutely incredibly. They are sticking to an old paradigm. When that paradigm is being dismantled and disintegrating in front of everybody's eyes who wants to see. And I have not seen, look, for example, Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the EU Commission. She goes to Brazil and tries to convince President Lula, that he should be not on the side of the Russians and the Chinese. And, these leaders of the developing countries, they have drawn the conclusion what it means to be, in a situation where development is being denied. So Lula went to China and to Shanghai, and together with Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil, they opened the new development bank. And Lula said, this bank will become the great big bank of the global south. And they will give development credits so that the underdevelopment and poverty of any developing country can be overcome. And there is a mood, a mood of complete, colonization is ended. And I think, the Western elites, they don't get it. I think it does require for the global south to be even stronger. And I think by the day, I can say, watching, what people in the global south are saying, they're becoming more self-asserted. They don't take this anymore, and the more a chorus comes, the better. Now, I think they first need to be shocked, because without that, I don't think no intelligent thought will enter their minds. But then I think we need to move to a higher paradigm, and I think China, in the final analysis, will stick to its win-win cooperation for the whole world. Xi Jinping has made the Global Security Initiative, Global Development Initiative, and Global Civilizational Initiative as worldwide proposals to move to a new paradigm. And I think that, in the final analysis, we have to convince the people of the United States and Europe not to confront this emerging new world economic order, but, to join it. I think that's the only way how we can avoid a catastrophe. So it's a big job, and that's why we need every single person. So if you are sitting in Algeria, join our fight, help us join our international peace coalition, because we have to make that an absolutely worldwide phenomena where people really become world citizens, because the existence of all of us is absolutely at stake.
Now, here are two questions which I think are responses to the conference we had last Saturday. Eric in the Philippines asks, what is the hidden menace to world peace? He said there's all this discussion, but not enough action. What is holding that back? And then from Texas, there's a question, are you worried about the CIA today and the possibility of interference in the 2024 election?
Well, I think the answer to the last question is pretty clear. I mean, President Trump, basically is now saying that the judicial system of the United States is at stake. And I think known journalist Patrick Lawrence made the same point emphatically. I think this is really true, because, what they are doing now against, and I don't know if it's the CIA or the FBI or whoever, but what they are doing against former President Trump is really selective justice. Because, what happened to Hillary Clinton? Was she ever held to account for Russiagate, which is proven a lie? What about Hunter Biden's laptop and his dealings in Ukraine? What about other people who had classified documents in their private homes? I think Pence was one of them, and several others. So it's very clear that this is targeting President Trump, and they want to prevent him from being an effective candidate in the next election. I think Trump should at this point reflect, if he would have declassified the Russiagate documents, and most importantly, if he would have exonerated my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, because the apparatus which is now going after Trump is exactly the same structure, and sometimes even the same persons who prosecuted my late husband and who tried to shut down our movement with the most, what Ramsey Clark had called the most incredible bending of the legal system of the United States in the history ever. I think that has not become smaller just because of what's happening against Trump right now. Because what happened against Lyndon LaRouche was the biggest crime, and not because of only what was done to him and to us, but because it deprived the American people of seeing the only solution which would have made it possible for the United States, to have a completely different world. So, Trump should not have, if he wanted to exonerate Stephen Bannon, that's one thing, but not to exonerate Lyndon LaRouche. I think he's now paying the bill for having had that short sight of not understanding to do that. What happens to him would not happen if he would have done that. But I think, the situation in the United States is extremely dangerous, and, it's very clearly an effort to dismantle the entire presidential election system. And obviously, everybody should be extremely concerned about that. Now, why is all of this happening? Going back to the first question, the end of a system. And this has happened many times in history, I think 16 times or so, where you had one entire system disintegrating. And, I think the former ambassador of China to the United States has pointed out to the fact 14 times it came to a major war. And that is obviously the biggest danger we are seeing right now. But we are experiencing the end of the neoliberal system, the end of the colonial system, the end of the unipolar world, and the emergence of a new world system, a multipolar world, which is not yet finished. It's struggling. It's like it has the birth pains of a birth in process, but it's not yet there. So, I think we are in a very difficult and dangerous situation, and therefore we, can only say we need every single soul on the planet to become active with us to try to make sure that this period of history ends up positively and stays in existence.
Well, we still have a few more minutes for your questions. You can send them to questions@schillerinstitute.org. Helga, I have one for you from Takis, who goes through a list of the crises facing mankind today: biochemical warfare, warnings of a more dangerous pandemic, World War III in Europe, the destruction of Europe. And then he comes to what he says that concerns him is the devaluing of life, human life. And he said, how can we address these problems from the standpoint of restoring values? What can we do?
Well, I think what you are describing only happens in parts of the world. It happens emphatically in the United States. It happens increasingly in Europe. I mean, in the United States, you can name the long list of mass shootings, youth suicides, drug addiction, and all of these things. And in Europe, it's a very dangerous discussion. I mean, there's now an active debate about active euthanasia, not euthanasia, but medical assistance to commit suicide to people who decide to do so. Now, that may sound like a humanitarian thing, but if you know the history of euthanasia, especially in Germany, it was at Nuremberg where basically people want that, to discuss, to put into question the sacredness of each individual life is putting everything on a schiefe Ebene. I don't know this word in English right now. On a plane where things, once you start to have a downward movement, it can quickly go all the way, as we have seen in Germany 80 years ago. So that's very bad. But fortunately, I think that in many parts of the world, especially in Asia, this has taken a completely different road. There are many scientists in, India, in China, in the Southeast Asian countries who are absolutely optimistic about the power of the human mind to create science, to overcome any barrier. And they connect that with the 5,000-year-old history of their cultures. So fortunately, there is a very powerful tendency to go in the other direction, to put the life and the values on a completely high pedestal and make it the basis for life. Now, what we have to do in Europe and in the United States, we have to connect to our best traditions. America, well, you had the American Revolution. That was the War of Independence, was the first anti-colonial war in history. Go back to that. Fight the British again. It would be very healthy to kick out all these advisors from Washington who are whispering in the ears of the establishment inside the Beltway. You have John Quincy Adams. You have Lincoln. You have FDR, John F. Kennedy, and above all, Linda LaRouche, Martin Luther King, and some others. In Europe, well, we have an incredible wealth. We have the Italian Renaissance. We have the period of the École Polytechnique in France. We have in Germany, we have a wealth of beautiful scientists, discoverers, composers, poets. And all we have to do is we have to reconnect to that tradition. And if I would not have the hope that this is possible, even in a place as occupied as Germany right now, that the spirit of Leibniz, of Schiller, of Beethoven of the Ninth Symphony, that all of this can become alive again, I would have quit politics a long time ago, but I'm absolutely convinced that it is possible because the human nature is essentially good and it just needs to see a perspective, and that's why the Schiller Institute is here.
The English phrase you were looking for before is the slippery slope, that once you go on that slippery slope, you're going straight into the hell of fascism and genocide. Helga, on the question of culture, I have one more question for you, which came to my attention from someone who sent me a video of somebody who was talking about the fight to return to a tuning of C at 256. Your frequency, the note C tuned to the frequency of 256. This was a major campaign run by your husband. It had tremendous response in Italy because of the Verdi. This was the Verdi tuning. And so a video just appeared of someone who starts out by talking about this is the crazy idea of Verdi, and Verdi, the Italians have embraced it. And he said, so I looked into it more, and what did I find? Behind it was the crackpot Lyndon LaRouche, and then he retailed all the slanders about Lynn. But I find it interesting that this would come up now precisely at a moment when you're discussing this importance of returning to the classical tradition. So I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
Well, that campaign was indeed extremely important because, it was supported by all major singers at the time. Everybody, you can look at the list of signatures from Renata Tebaldi to, Capuccilli to, just everybody. And actually hundreds of top singers around the world signed that campaign because they were very happy, because if you tune higher in the C42 range and even higher than that, it is very bad for the human voice, and especially young singers who are forced to permanently have their pitch in a higher tuning, they lose their voice because it's damaging the chords. Now, interestingly, this was obviously also the case for the instruments. Naturally, the wind instruments is one thing, but for example, we had actually a very deep friendship with Norbert Breinin, the first violinist of the Amadeus Quartet. And he had a Stradivari, and he did an experiment in his summer house in Italy, or from where he went to the studios, and he made a testing, and he could prove that the Stradivari was indeed created in such a way that it was meant to be played in the lower tuning, and that it was a stress on the instrument, damaging it in the long term if it would be tuned up. So this is a very important question, because you may think, what does it matter if it's a little bit higher or not? But if you think, for example, about the register shift of the singers, and that, for example, if you have a German poem which is composed into a lied, the composer, Schumann, Schubert, Beethoven, whoever, they have a very clear understanding of that. And if there is a higher tuning, you do something to the composition which tends to ruin it. So, while this may seem like a, esoteric question, only interesting for the musicians, if you start to really study classical music and study the composition and study what it takes to bring out the beauty and the truth out of the composition, these are the questions which are giving you the insight to understand, what was the intention of the composer and the poet, and the two together in a higher work of art. So these are not esoteric questions at all. And I think it's very good if this comes up, because maybe some music-loving people feel encouraged to look at our campaign and, find a reason to renew it, which I think would be very beneficial for everybody.
Well, and it's important you brought this up, the battle for beauty and truth, which we had a clip from John Kennedy where he made precisely that point, that that's what makes life on this earth worth living. So, Helga, thanks for joining us today. We look forward to your continued interventions, and we'll see you again next week.
Yes, and don't forget to become active with us. That's the most important thing you can do in an extraordinary moment of history like the one we are in right now.